Welcome back to the latest edition of Until Saturday. I'm Ari Wasserman, and I have the fan on in my room because I am still sweating from the end of the Sugar Bowl. I'm joined by Chris Vanini. Dave Ubben is actually at the game, and we determined later on in that game that he probably wasn't going to be ready till 2 or 3 in the morning Central Time. So
At
we
least,
have a
yes.
sub. We have a sub. Chris, how are we doing today?
Oh my God, man. I am exhausted. I'm sweaty like you. Those were two of the craziest finishes we've ever seen in like postseason college football in our lifetime. And they happened back to back. Oh my God, dude.
Yeah, so we have a lot to get to. First, let me just formally welcome everybody to the Until Saturday College Football Semifinal Reaction. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're here watching live right now, we certainly appreciate your presence. I know it's late at night. I know it's a weeknight, and people have to get back to work on Wednesday or Tuesday or whatever day it is. So we appreciate you here. Also, thank you for calling in. We are getting your voicemails at the Until Saturday phone line for the Sunday Sound Off episodes. We will be getting to those this week as we preview the national championship game. We are going to be talking about both games. We're going to get to the 247 talent composite. We're going to get to Michigan. We're going to get to all the things that you've been listening to all season long, and I'm super excited to dive into it. One last note, please make sure to sign up for the Until Saturday newsletter where you can get your daily fill of college football news delivered right to your inbox. The links can all be found in the show's description, and if you're here on YouTube and you don't subscribe to the podcast, link again in the show's description. Leave a review, leave a question in the review. We will try to get to it on the show. Anything you can do to interact with the YouTube channel and the podcast feed is greatly appreciated. First, why don't we start, Chris, with the Sugar Bowl? And that had to have been one of the craziest endings to a college football game that I've ever seen. And I think that if Texas would have won, it might have been the craziest ending I've ever seen. So if you are just
Yeah.
living under the rock and you're not a college football fan, I'm assuming everybody in here has listened or has watched already. But Washington was basically putting the game away. They could have taken knees and gotten it down to like 10, 15 seconds left. They ran the ball instead. Handoff to star running back Dylan Johnson, who hurt his knee, it looked like, and it seems like it could be a pretty significant injury on the last play before the punt was going to come, which stopped the clock, thus giving Texas, a team that we thought was buried at the beginning of the fourth quarter, a chance to go win the game down by 6 late. And they drove all the way down the field and ran one final play with 1 second left from the 13-yard line. I know I didn't say this if you're not listening. Alabama beat Michigan in the Rose Bowl 27-20, and Washington got it done 37-31 over Texas in the Sugar Bowl. So the national championship game will be Washington and Michigan, two teams who rank outside of the top 10 in the 247 Sport Composite rankings. But first, let's just break down the Sugar Bowl, and then we'll get to the Michigan-Alabama game later. Chris,
Yeah.
I'm rambling. I'm excited. I'm nervous. I don't know what to talk about. I know I
Dude,
want to talk about everything. That was insane.
So let's talk about that ending. So a lot of people's like, why didn't Washington just kneel out the clock? Well, because if they couldn't kneel it out, it would have been about 20 seconds or so. So they decided to run the ball 3 times. Try to get the first down. If you get the first down, you win the game. I can understand why they did it. This wasn't Miami, Georgia Tech earlier this season.
No.
Right. And then Dylan Johnson gets hurt. And it's like the worst possible thing you could have happen because that stopped the clock about 47 seconds left. If Texas had won that game, that would have been the most heartbreaking loss, I think, in the history of college football. To lose that way, to know you are about to go to the national championship, and you not only see your star player get hurt, but that specific injury then may cost you the game. Just, man, that was crazy. Did you think Texas was going to score when they had
I
a
did, yes.
couple of shots there? I thought they would too.
I thought the second that Whittington caught that pass to get him down to like the 30, that the game was over. Yeah.
Yeah, I did too.
And if you watch the game, Washington outplayed Texas for the majority of the second half. It was a pretty even first half. Texas and Washington were both moving the ball with relative ease, but Texas got the turnover bug in the second half and I think ran like 10 plays in the third quarter and into the beginning of the fourth quarter before they finally got their offense on the field because they kept fumbling the ball away. And Washington, behind a masterful performance from Michael Penix Jr., it was just an explosive game. He passed for 430 yards, 31 rushing yards, and had 2 touchdowns, the second most passing yards in semi history behind Joe Burrow, who had 493 in 2019 semifinals. It was just an incredible game. It seemed like Washington was going to the national championship for the last 30 minutes of the game. And then all of a sudden you look up and Texas has the ball somehow with 45 seconds left, down 2. You have a personal foul call on the punt return that gives them an extra 15 yards of field position and some breathing room. Like the insanity of the ending of that game was something to behold.
In the drive before that, when Washington kicked the field goal, remember, they passed the ball on 3rd down. They could have run it and have Texas called the timeout there. So it was like a couple of plays. And
there was another drive, Chris, earlier in the 4th quarter when Texas had a heartbreaking turnover on the edge of the Washington red zone. And then Washington got the ball back and threw it 3 times and only ran like 30 seconds off the clock and gave the ball right back to Texas. So like the clock management, listen, I've been a number one proponent of Kalen DeBoer's aggressiveness. And I even tweeted during the game, I would not run it again because Texas could not stop Washington's passing attack for the entire 3rd quarter. It was like a chef at Mastro Steakhouse filleting, the steak in the back room. I understand, what they did, but there was a flea flicker there at the end of that drive that was kind of misplaced and weird, and they got a little cute there. But man, let's just give Washington its flowers here. Okay, you have a team that ranks, I believe, 24th in their 26th in the 247 Sport composite rankings. They're getting Heisman-like production from a quarterback, and I voted for him. I wish he would have won after watching this game. I think he should have won, obviously, because I voted for him. But it was a masterful performance by a quarterback, but I am in awe of the depth, the talent, the reliability of that skill position group. And I hope to God that Dylan Johnson, the running back that got injured there at the end of the game, is able to play in the national championship game. Let's hope. But their receivers, I don't know how anybody covers that. I just don't.
This game ended up being pretty much, I think, what we expected. Texas was able to run the ball. Washington was able to move the ball through the air. And eventually, though, Texas got so far behind that it couldn't keep running the ball. It had to throw the ball and got a couple of breaks at the end to get it close. But man, Michael Penix getting 430 yards. They had a couple kind of design type of runs in there, and you knew Texas was not ready for that because Penix is not a guy that runs. The dimes that this dude was dropping, sideline throws, back shoulder catches, he was absolutely at his peak, just like you. That's why I voted for him for my number one Heisman spot, because every time in the biggest games and the biggest moments, that dude made the plays.
And they say sex sells, dude. It's just beautiful to watch too.
It's
aesthetically pleasing.
One of the best deep ball throwers we have ever seen, I think, in this sport. I said that when I saw him play against Oregon in the regular season, and you saw it in Vegas at the championship game.
And when you're sitting high up and you see that ball whistling through the air, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. And I know that he's going to get torn apart for his age, his injury history, and his unorthodox throwing motion here in the next 4 months as we if you're a psycho like me and watch NFL draft coverage on the NFL
I'm not looking forward to that. I'm not looking forward to months of breaking down Michael Penix Jr. and NFL draft stuff. I don't care right now either. It's a national championship. I was kind of bothered by everybody who was talking about that,
Yeah, I just am looking at this game, and I knew in my gut, and listen, we're going to get to the stars discussion because we have 2 teams that are going to be playing for a national championship that are ranked outside of the top 12. And I thought that was literally impossible. The Group A was eliminated completely when Alabama lost to Michigan, and Texas was a Group A minus because they're in the top 5, but they lost to Washington. So you've got the number, was it 14 and 26 or 12 and 26 ranked teams? But I left Vegas thinking that Washington could win the national title, and I still think that. Crazy.
Remember, they were an underdog in this game.
Sorry, Anna.
They were underdogs in the Pac-12 championship game. Everybody thought they were touchdown underdog to Oregon, even though they beat them, and they handled Oregon. I think they opened at was it 5 or 6 for this game and got down to about 3.5. I think it was for Washington again. So they're undefeated. They're going to the championship. they've been underdogs the last 2 games, and now here they are playing for the championship.
I had a tickle in my throat and was coughing, and I had to mute myself. But if you're listening to it in podcast form, it does sound like I was crying when I was talking about the start, didn't it? For a second there, it seemed like I was breaking down. Yeah.
So Ari and I were at the Cotton Bowl a couple days ago. This man was coughing up a storm, sneezing in that press box. It was tough for him. I was worried I was getting sick. I think I'm going to be okay, but yeah, Ari's been dealing with something there.
Well, if it makes you feel better, Chris, the next morning I woke up and felt a lot better and wasn't coughing. So I don't know if I was allergic to something or what it was, but I felt bad sitting next to you coughing.
We were all allergic to the offense in that game. It's okay.
Yes. But I remember leaving Vegas thinking this Washington team, with the weapons that it has and a quarterback that delivers with precision repeatedly, that they could win the national championship, even if they played Alabama. Like, I actually felt that. And it was a bizarre thing because for the 26 team in the 247 Sport Composite rankings, you know how I feel about that. But also Texas has the same type of weapons, and those weapons weren't nearly as effective. I know A.D. Mitchell had a crucial touchdown catch there as they were trying to make their comeback at the end, and Xavier Worthy caught I think a 30-yard pass at the beginning of the drive, but not a lot of production in totality from the Texas receivers that I thought could stack up toe-to-toe with what Washington brought to the table. But now Washington is going into this game, and we're going to get to a playoff or the national championship preview at the end of the show in the last segment. But I don't know who covers that. I don't know if anybody covers that. I made a joke during the game. I don't know if the 2000 Ravens in their prime could have covered that.
So as someone who covered a number of Texas games this year, this seemed like, of the 4 playoff teams, Washington seemed like the worst matchup for Texas because the biggest weakness they had was that secondary.
Yeah.
And I think when you saw Washington's receivers and what they were able to do, and look, so a lot of those plays that Michael Penix made, by the way, it was good coverage. He just made a ridiculous
here's the thing
throw
that you have to say about Washington's receivers. No matter what the situation is, they make the play. And I think I tweeted this. Is the ball coming through a tight window? No problem. Catch. Is there great coverage? No problem. Catch. Does the cornerback swipe the ball and tip it into the air? No problem. Catch. Like, Penix delivers the ball with precision, Chris. But when the ball arrives, those receivers and skill position players catch the ball in tough circumstances repeatedly, over and over and over again, without fail. Now, I think that the thing that is most interesting about that is I thought Texas would be able to do the same. And for the most part, in the first half, even without production from Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell, they were able to do that. They went into the locker room tied 21. I thought it was the most impressive drive of Quinn Ewers' career to go down there and cut the lead and tie it up going into the half. But the production there was never really quite apparent. So there were a ton of explosive plays in this game, 11 total explosives.
He had completions of 29, 19, 77, 52, 32, 23, 22, plus 3 or 4 runs of more than 10 yards too. Washington, like, there's no such thing as a 50-50 ball with these receivers. Like, that's the thing. They're like 75-20 minimum. You put that ball up and Michael Penix is going to put it in a good enough spot. Those receivers are all going to come down with it. They've got to
be breaking some sort of record of like catches and traffic stats. I don't know if PFF or College Football Focus or whatever tracks that sort of thing. But as a result of it, even though Washington didn't have to run the ball that much, still held the time of possession advantage by almost 13 minutes, 36 minutes and 20 seconds to 23 minutes and 40 seconds. So it just was an unbelievable game. And I think that you could come back and say, well, this is a terrible matchup for Texas. And it certainly kind of turns out that it was. But I think that Texas lost this game turning it over on offense, not because their defense was poor. And the fact of the matter is that Texas shot itself in the foot so many times in the second half there with those turnovers that, they were still in the game with 1 second left and could have won. So, that is the name of the game here. You got to play at a high level. You can't make crushing mistakes. And these fumbles from the running backs were tough. And I think that, if you've been listening to the show, I've said pretty regularly that the Jonathan Brooks loss was huge. And you got to remember that these are reserve running backs. True freshman CJ Baxter put one on the turf that didn't have as much experience and weren't, as integral into the plan before he was injured, making these mistakes. So I think all the credit goes to Washington. I think this team is built to win, and Texas just let it go.
So let's talk about Quinn Ewers. He goes 24 for 43, 318 yards and a touchdown. That's 7.4 yards per attempt. But at one point, he was like 10 for 20 for like 100 yards. He really struggled, especially in that first half. The fact that it was tied at halftime, it didn't feel like it was tied. And it was because Washington had that muffed punt that Texas turned into a touchdown. So therefore, it ends up being a tie game. And Ewers was able to make some plays on the run, but he did not. You and I were both at that Big 12 championship game, and he was dealing maybe the best game of his career. He really struggled in this game. What did you make of him?
Well, I mean, listen, here's the stat that really matters. At halftime, A.D. Mitchell had 0 targets and Xavier Worthy had one target and a reception for 7 yards. And Washington's defensive end, Braylon Frisk, was all over the field in this game. I mean, if you were watching it, this guy was terrorizing Texas, and it just was a tough go of it. Now, I didn't watch that game thinking, God, Quinn stinks, or he's having a bad game, or, I thought that he showed a lot of poise there at the second half and helping his team get back into it when we thought the game was lost. I don't know if I put this on his shoulders, but certainly when you talk about we talked that this matchup was going to be more entertaining than the Rose Bowl because you have 2 offensive minds with Kalen DeBoer and Grubbs on one side, you have Sark on the other dialing up these plays. It's like you have to scheme your best players open to get the ball. And, in the second half, the stats were low because they didn't really possess the ball. Again, I think 10 plays in the first quarter and a little into the fourth. That can't happen. But in the first half, it's like, how do you get through that entire second half first half without really targeting?
Well, and it looked like for a minute we thought he was going to come out of the game. He took that hit, fell back on his head, hit the back of his head, and I guess Arch Manning had his helmet on and was warming up, but eventually Quinn Ewers came in and played well after that. I mean, he did come in and probably play better in the second half than he did in the first half. But yeah, it did at a time when Michael Penix was winning the game for Washington. Quinn Ewers wasn't really winning the game for Texas. It didn't really feel like the offense knew what it wanted to do because they were running the ball. Look, CJ Baxter averaged 7.1 yards per carry. Blue was at 6.6. Even Ewers was at 6.8 when he had 8 carries of his own. So they were getting some chunk plays, not large plays. Their longest run was only from a running back, so only 16 yards, but they were consistently getting ahead of the chains and then just couldn't put enough drives together. And then they fell behind by 13 in the fourth quarter and you had to throw the ball more. So, it was for a guy like Quinn Ewers, who was, a perfectly rated recruit. I think this is a game where you kind of want him to go out and win it for you. And he didn't play bad, but he didn't play like Michael Penix. And that was ultimately maybe the difference in the game. Especially that final drive, by the way. There were 2 plays in a row where you were throws to a receiver who's just not even looking for the ball. Very weird.
Started off that way. Yeah.
And
there was that weird swing pass when they got deep into the red zone too that wasted 5 seconds. I wasn't really sure what was going on there. But also too, a very frantic situation, and I can understand if you're not all firing on 100% cylinders. Though I do believe that if Washington were in that situation, they would have found a way. And I think that's what makes teams great. And winning a national championship in the sport, Alabama and Georgia have been so good and dominant at winning national championships. It's brainwashed us into thinking how easy it is, and it's really incredibly difficult. So, kudos to Washington for getting past Texas. I did not see it coming. Somebody just said, "Rip to your 21 ticket." The hardest part about the 20-1 ticket was that Washington came into the game as an underdog. And if Texas would have led by 7 or 10 at any point in that game, I would have been able to get out of there and get a hedge. Didn't hedge it because I never got an opportunity. And I was hoping to get 4-1 or 5-1 during the game. Just didn't happen. So rest in peace to my Longhorns. And listen, hey, I still got love for you, Texas. You came through for me, and I feel good about the
They're
season
heading
that
in a
they
good
had.
direction. Yeah,
They're heading in the right
yeah,
direction. I still think that
for
they,
sure.
honestly, if they would have played a better game against Washington, could have been good enough to win the national championship this year, which I think is a nice segue point into the Michigan-Alabama game, Michigan winning and
Oof.
winning in dramatic fashion. And this is where the stars really kind of, listen, 5 is where Texas ranks in the 247 sport composite, and Washington, again, is way behind them and at 26, so 21 spots. And Alabama was the most talented team in college football recruiting rankings history in terms of total team talent. And
Second, they were slightly behind last year, Alabama. I
they
think last
were.
year was what? Yeah, I
I
looked
don't
up
think
today.
that's
I think
true.
last year Alabama was like 1,016, and then this year was 1,015. But it's basically the same thing.
Interesting. Oh, I thought for sure that they were. Either way, their
I'll double
average
check.
player is basically a top 75 player nationally, and they lost to a
Right.
team that isn't anywhere near that, and that has to
Nope.
be reconciled. So let's break down that game, and then we'll talk about this. But Alabama, I thought got its ass kicked in the first half. Just physically, I
Totally.
thought that Michigan completely dominated defensively. They had 5 first half sacks from 5 different players in the first half, and I think that's the most sacks that Michigan has had this season. I think they had 5 versus UNLV, multiple 5-man rushes, twists up front, 4-man fronts, defensive line movement, no additional blockers from Bama. They kept running this empty formation that they couldn't block. The snapping was terrible, as we'll talk about, I think, quite a bit there towards the end. I think Michigan did a very good job of physically dominating their opponent, which is the number one thing that doesn't happen typically when you have these talent discrepancies, right? So Michigan owns my kudos and, forever bending over saying sorry, because the ability to play the game in which they didn't just win, they physically dominated, I thought. Now, in the second half, Alabama got it rolling, had some miscues and stuff with the snaps and whatever, but they did get a lead. They were winning 20-13. And then Michigan took the game over, won it, and the game came down to overtime. And you would think, well, how could a game be more exciting that didn't go to overtime? And the Sugar Bowl figured it out. But I think this was the best semifinal game in the 14 field history. I just don't think that we have.
I,
People say
I
last
just
year, but I think this year was better.
no. I always come back to that Georgia Oklahoma game in the Rose Bowl, that where Georgia made the comeback. It's in the Rose Bowl.
But what happened in the other? What
That's
happened to the other
one.
game though?
What other game?
The other
Oh,
game
you
that
mean best?
year,
The
the
best
best
pair of
day.
semifinals. Oh,
Yeah,
yes, totally, absolutely.
yeah,
I would
yeah,
put this
yeah.
over last year for sure. I thought you meant individual game, but yeah, so we got a number of comments in the chat that were both people that hate Michigan. We don't hate Michigan. We just, I think, questioned Michigan and their ability, but to win this game.
Can I just address this,
Yeah, yeah,
because it's
yeah.
my thing.
You
And I got a
made
lot of this
your
on
homework for
Twitter.
everybody. You
No,
did.
no, it's not about a Michigan thing. I think it's more of a talent thing. Coming into the season, there have been only 3 teams in the history of the 247 sport composite, which goes back about 20 years, that have won a national championship without having signed a top 10 class in any of the previous, or top 5 class in any of the previous 4 years. 2 were Clemson, and one was led by Deshaun Watson, and one was led by Trevor Lawrence, and the other one was Auburn before the playoff era, and they had Cam Newton.
Yes.
So, as you look at my point of view as a journalist, I think that it's funny, Chris, because I think fans sometimes think that it's our jobs to prognosticate and never be wrong about the future, when really it's our jobs to report about what has already happened while using the information that we have at hand to try to predict the future. If I was 100% perfect at predicting the future, then I would be living in Las Vegas in Seven Hills with an infinity pool looking out over the strip and a cigar in my mouth. But that's not our
One
job.
day.
We're not supposed to be perfect. But what we are supposed to do is use the information at hand that we have, both in the history and the statistics and what we understand about the game, in order to try to make the biggest projection or the best projection that we can. So if you look back at the way that Michigan has assembled their roster the last 5 years, there is nothing that they have done from a high school recruiting standpoint that makes you feel like they could and should and would win a national championship. It would have been irresponsible for me to say that they could, because that was wrong. They are doing something this year that has never been done before. They are doing something this year that has never been done before, period. So I don't feel bad about being wrong about somebody doing something incredible. Now, does this mean that moving forward, this is the first year where the 247 sports composite rankings start fading into the history with the transfer portal and all that stuff? Absolutely. That's a discussion that we have to have now. It's a discussion that we have to have in the future. This is the first time, though, that it's happened. So I am here right now. If you're listening, I was wrong. Michigan, I think, is going to win the national championship. And we'll get more into that at the end of the show when we do a quick breakdown of the national championship game. What I don't feel bad for is using my expertise in my job and my knowledge of how college football programs and champions have been built over the course of the past 20 years in order to make a prediction that I don't think that Michigan can do that. I did not think that Michigan was equipped from a athletic standpoint, regardless of how well they develop and how well they do in the transfer portal, to beat Ohio State, win a Big Ten championship game, beat Alabama, and beat another opponent in 4 consecutive games, because no team built like Michigan has ever done it. Now, that said, Michigan has a lot of players that are going to be drafted, and that is a testament to the development and the scouting eye that Jim Harbaugh has, and I would be a complete asshole if I sat here right now and didn't acknowledge that. And that's the reason why I've been wrong. Now, does that mean this is a sustainable model, or that this is the new way that college football is going to work, or that recruiting rankings don't matter anymore? Absolutely not. So, I'm never going to go down that road.
So
but
let
Michigan
me just jump in here.
It deserves an applause from me and a frank I was wrong. I'm absolutely willing to say I was wrong. They're doing something I thought was impossible.
Yeah, like I tweeted the team talent rankings before we came out here, and Ari took that as a shot at him. It wasn't really. If I wanted to, I would say look at 3 of the last 4 teams that play for the national championship. It's TCU, Michigan, and Washington. Only one Group A team has taken one of the 4 slots moving forward. However,
that's an interesting way of looking at it, considering what happened in the game last year. But yeah,
I was going to say, well, TCU beat Michigan, who is not in the Group A group, and this year is a little bit weird because Washington has a 6-year quarterback. Like the extra year guys, it's going to take a number of years for that to filter out. That is also kind of playing a role in all of this, I think, in terms of it not being a normal handful of years in terms of the pool of talent that is available. There are just older, better quarterbacks that are usually not here by now. Michigan, I had Michigan lower ranked than most people throughout the season, simply because I hadn't played anybody. And Michigan fans got really mad at me throughout the year because I had them down at 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever. And I was like, just play Penn State, play Ohio State, and that'll change. And they did, and they won, and it changed. I actually had Washington at number 1 coming into the postseason, Michigan at 2. Here we go. It's going to be Michigan and Washington for what it is. So let's talk about this game. I texted our group chat in the first quarter, about halfway through the first quarter. And I said, I've seen enough. Michigan is winning this game, unless JJ McCarthy makes a couple of boneheaded mistakes. And you replace JJ McCarthy with special teams, and that's pretty much what happened. Michigan was the better team in this game. They dominated Alabama at the line of scrimmage in that first half in a way that we never see Alabama dominated. And then things got weird. There's a muff punt at the beginning of the game. Michigan misses a field goal. They botched the extra point. And so you had that's like 11 points that added up, and it kept Alabama in this game early when Michigan could have gone up 2 scores pretty quickly. And perhaps
it felt like Michigan should have been up by 21 at halftime to me. I don't know. Maybe that's excessive, but at least by 14.
Yeah, exactly. And so then Alabama's driving toward the end of the half, and you're like, Alabama might have the lead before halftime here. It was like just weird how Alabama was able to hold on because Michigan was just kept making those killer mistakes that they made last year that cost them against TCU. And it almost cost them in this game to the point where Alabama was up 20-13 late in the game and Michigan needed to make a drive. So do we want to talk about the end of this game?
Yes, let's talk about the game first, and then we'll get back into the Stars national championship discussion. But first, Michigan dominated the first half. But I think the story of this game is twofold. One, how did Alabama get through this entire season with a center that can't snap the ball properly? I don't know how many bad snaps there were. It felt like there were at least 12 to 15 bad snaps in this game that affected plays, right?
Every single snap. Milroe was like, I got to be ready for where the ball is going to go. And every snap, his footwork's off, his timing is off because he had no idea where that snap was going. It was wild. And I hadn't watched a ton of Alabama this year. I said, Alabama fans, has this been happening all season? And it was a resounding yes. This has been a problem all year for them.
Alabama couldn't block Michigan in the first half. I think a lot of that was about some of the personnel that they were using in these empty packages out of the gun. They rarely used 12-man personnel or max protect in the first half. I think in the second half they had more pass pro with running backs to keep Milroe safe back there.
Went a lot
so
heavier
as they did that, Michigan's defense wasn't quite as dominant. And Seth McLaughlin, the center's name here, I thought played an okay game outside of that during these runs. They changed up their approach, added more protection in the second half, and produced 170 yards roughly, including 111 rushing yards. Chase McClellan got going. Jalen Milroe got going a little bit, and Alabama took a lead. And it looked like Alabama was going to beat Michigan, and everybody was starting up with Jim Harbaugh's choking this game away, and people were pre-celebrating. And then J.J. McCarthy led Michigan down the field in a drive and then kept his cool. So we have to talk about J.J. McCarthy and Blake Corum because they went out and won the game. But first, why don't we talk about how it ended, which was this game going to overtime, Michigan going out and scoring first in overtime, Alabama getting to, I think, 4th and goal from the 3-yard line.
Yeah.
And the play call that they had, which was, it looked like a quarterback run right up the middle where they were just going to try to bolt. There was some thought process that maybe there was a swing pass that was an option and that a bad snap caused Milroe to panic and go forward. But we have Nick Saban's post-game comment here that makes it feel like the play call was indeed just to run up the middle with Milroe.
Coach Saban, could you talk about the last play and what made that one the best one that you wanted to go with?
We called 3 plays. One they called timeout, one we called timeout, and the last one that didn't work. So the fact that it didn't work made it a really bad call. You know what I mean? So, but we called timeout because we had a bad look. We had a good look on the first one. They must have known it. But Tommy just felt like the best thing that we could do was have a quarterback run, which was kind of our 2-point play, one of our 2-point plays for this game. And the ball was on the 3-yard line, which is just like a 2-point play. So, but we didn't get it blocked, so it didn't work. We didn't execute it very well, and it didn't work. And they pressured, and we thought they would pressure, but we thought we could gap them and block them and make it work, and it didn't.
So that was the call.
Yeah.
Thought.
It looked like the play was for Milroe to cut left because there's a pulling guard and he lets one of the rushers on the ends go around him. But the snap is so bad at the start that Milroe kind of panics and Alabama's right tackle gets completely blown up on the play. And so it just kind of collapsed on him. I think it was there. Like it would have been a bit of an effort. Like you couldn't have walked into the end zone, but if he had gotten a clean snap and taken off right away, there's room there to make that jump cut left behind the pulling guard, get into the end zone. From the camera angle we got during the game, it looked like he just took a snap and ran into the pile, which is basically what he did. But obviously that was not the play that they dialed up. It just got blown up by Michigan's defense.
Yeah. I mean, he made the comment there that was their 2-point conversion play. And it's like, I sometimes just like watch Washington and I just feel like that's like the golden standard of like in your bag moments. And I don't know if it's a lack of receiver talent at Alabama to draw these things up or if Michigan's defense was just too swarming. I mean, Will Johnson, the cornerback especially, is one of the best players in college football and, 5-star player. I just like, Nick Saban with a month to prepare. We heard a lot in the last month. And listen, if you watched the pregame show with me, I couldn't articulate how or why I thought Michigan would win this game. And they did, but with the game on the line, it seemed like it wasn't what I would have expected from a staff that had a month to prepare. I know it's tough and it's, I don't know.
I
thought it left.
I didn't hate the play. I didn't hate the
Yeah.
play because Milroe running upfield was your best play. You're not gonna have enough time to hold them back there for a pass. Michigan's gonna pressure because they've been getting the pressure. I was thinking like a speed option type of play, and again, it was kind of there. It just got blown up. I didn't hate that play. I did hate Alabama's first half game plan. They were going 3, 4, 5 wide a lot, and Michigan was getting pressure with 4 guys a lot of the
Took
time.
too long to adjust to that.
Took way too long. They come out in the second half. They immediately go to the heavy sets. The same thing they did against Georgia. They adjusted. They go to the heavy sets, 2 tight ends, 2 running backs type of stuff. They start moving the ball. And then sometimes they get out of it and they start passing. There's a drive where Alabama, instead of running, they're doing some quick option dump off passes. And it's just like, or they're getting Milroe on the outside when he's much more effective running between the tackles. Lane Kiffin even tweeted that during the game. So I thought Tommy Rees did not call a good game. It took him way too long to adjust. He did make the right adjustments, but it took very, very long to get there. And look, it's hard when your offensive line is getting blown up every other play. There's only so much you can do. But there was clearly something that was working for Alabama and something that was not. And they were consistently not sticking with the thing that was working. Although, again, in overtime, I thought the call was okay. It just didn't work. And sometimes that happens.
Let's talk about Michigan because they won and they deserve that.
Well, actually, before that, can we, since we're talking about the end of the game,
Homer,
can we talk about the muffed punt at the end of the game, at the end of regulation?
Sure.
You want to talk about one of the most demoralizing losses in the history of college football that Washington almost had? What would have losing in the semifinal on a safety with like 10 seconds to go?
Did you think that was a safety when you first watched the play?
No, because you could see he picked it up outside the end zone. He got tackled into the end zone, but you knew he picked it up in the field at like the 1 yard line. But holy crap, Michigan's punt returning in this game was so bad. They muffed like the first one. They had some inexperienced returners back there. They were constantly fair catching or not catching certain things. It cost them a lot of yards in this game that was helping Alabama. And you're the guy who's always tweeting about heels on the 10, man. Why is that dude fielding that punt at the 5 yard line?
We have to talk about this for at least a minute with the heels on the 10 thing. So the heels on the 10 thing is just dead. Like nobody does that anymore. Like no teams in any situation do it. And my understanding is that rule died because punters got better at executing kicks with higher hang time and gunners got faster to the point where they were able to get behind the return man and set up before the ball lands in a way that they couldn't do 20 years ago. So the thought process is if you fair catch it at the 5, it's better than letting the defenders who are standing behind you fair catch it or do something worse and pin you deeper. That said, I'm always of the thought process that if your heels are on the 10, it at least forces the other team to make a play, whereas fair catching it at the 5 resigns to terrible field position. But in that scenario, I don't even know why there's a return man back there at all. You're not running offense. Get out of the way. Like, what are you? I guess you're trying to stop it from getting pinned at the 1 so you don't get a safety that loses the game. But, like, that was insane. And luckily for Michigan, that didn't end up, hurting them. So, that said, overall thought process was that I thought that Michigan was the better football team in this game. They looked every bit as athletic. They hit harder. They did everything that I would question a team cannot do physically as a result of talent discrepancy that are found in these spreadsheets that I like to refer to very often. That said, I've also had a take in the past that I don't know that J.J. McCarthy is that dude. Okay, I've said that. I think he's a very good college player. I don't think that he deserves or deserved to be in the same sentence as guys like Michael Penix or Drake May or Caleb Williams or the playmakers that Cam Newton likes to say, game manager versus, you see that game manager versus playmaker, that whole controversy. I would have put him more in Cam Newton's game manager mode. But in this game, J.J. McCarthy was in a position where a bad quarterback or a weak quarterback or a not elite quarterback would have faltered it. Down in the fourth quarter to Alabama by 7. I think Alabama had the ball 2 times down or up 7 with a chance to go up and just end the game. And Michigan's defense stepped up. but he had 246 total yards, 3 passing touchdowns, and a 62% completion rating. He had multiple difference-making plays, including a third down run that set up a 4th and 1 conversion by Blake Corum on the first scoring drive. Off-schedule throw in the first quarter for a 19-yard gain while rolling left. Broken gadget play where McCarthy threw off his back foot after Roman Wilson threw it to him.
That was crazy. That was crazy.
The best catch in the game was J.J. McCarthy, like jumping up 10 yards behind the line of scrimmage and one-hand jump manning it.
That's a backwards pass. If he doesn't catch
pass, it's a fumble.
That's a fumble, and either it's a big loss or Alabama gets the ball. Huge athletic play.
So I'm in this weird position now where you have to acknowledge that J.J. McCarthy won his team a game on a stage in which we thought he could not do it or hasn't done it in the past, okay? But on the other hand, did you think that he played well enough to elevate him to that category, which is Heisman Trophy finalist next year if he comes back, or in that discussion with the playoff quarterbacks and the Heisman finalists that were in that award this year? Like, has he elevated himself in your mind?
Remember, this guy finished 10th in the Heisman. Next week. He finished 10th in the Heisman and got a first-place vote, and we were blown away by that. Look, he played well, and he made the winning plays, and he didn't cost them the game. A year ago against TCU, he cost them the game because of 2 pick sixes. And you know his final numbers here are: he goes 17 for 27, 221 yards, 3 touchdowns, 8.2 yards per rush. He also 8.2 yards per pass. He also had 25 yards rushing, 8.3 yards per rush. But like, you know, I saw a lot of people like, look, that game, that tying touchdown at the end of regulation, that's a legacy drive for JJ McCarthy. Okay, but here's what JJ McCarthy
and they went down with ease.
Drive.
We got to talk about it, dude.
They did, but hold on. Here's what JJ McCarthy did on that drive. Blake Corum run. McCarthy incomplete pass on 3rd and 2. Then McCarthy tosses it out to a wide open Blake Corum for 27 yards. McCarthy runs for 16 yards
on 4th down.
And no, the run was on 1st down. The
4th down swing pass
to Corum, yes, was on 4th down. And then he had the one pass that was kind of tipped up, and Roman Wilson made a heck of a catch on that. So he completed 2 passes on the drive, both of them for more than 25 yards, although one was just a dump off, and he ran for 16 yards. So like, it was a solid job. He made the plays he needed to play, but it wasn't like McCarthy boom, 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 taking him down the field and stuff like that. It was a lot of Blake Corum making some good runs and runs after the catch and stuff like that. So like, JJ McCarthy played well enough to win the game. I wouldn't say he won them the game. I wouldn't say I'd say Michigan's offensive line won them the game more than anything else, but he did what he needed to do. He was the better quarterback in this game by far. And he's about to play for a national championship. Jim Harbaugh said after the game, he's the greatest quarterback in Michigan history. You know, we can debate that, but I don't know. Like, the guy wins, and maybe that's all that matters in the end.
Yeah, I don't know if you always have to decide who won you the game. I mean, if I had to give anybody the trophy for winning the game, it would be Michigan's offensive line. Although Blake Corum did rush for 83 yards, had 35 clutch receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, including the game winner in overtime. Defensive line, too. I mean, Michigan, here's the thing that I'll say about Michigan. Before the game, in my analysis of how I thought it would go, because listen, the line was weird. I didn't understand why Michigan was favored all week. Or all month, excuse me. I thought the line was going to move in the opposite direction. It actually closed with Michigan minus 2.5, which, you know, considering where the action was, it was strange. So from that standpoint, I kind of had this feeling that Michigan was going to win in my gut. But in my head, the analysis was not there. I thought that meant that Jalen Milroe would turn the ball over a ton, that, you know, Alabama would be muffing punts and doing the bull crap with the snap and all that. And really, if you go back and look, Michigan didn't play that clean of a game either, and they still won. You know, I would have thought that Michigan would have had to play the thing that we, always say about Michigan, which is flawless execution, knowing who they are, trusting in their system, and making plays and not making terrible mistakes. We're talking about a team that didn't give up long runs and didn't turn the ball over and came out in the first quarter. The first play of the game could have been an interception. It looked like it was going to be one. They muffed a punt. They gave up a long run for a touchdown on Alabama's first drive or second drive. Like, they were doing all the things that they did not do to get to this stage. and they still won. So, like, when you talk about who was the better team, like, anybody who looks you square in the eyes and says that Alabama was the better football team on Monday, is a liar. That's not true. Michigan was the better team.
Totally, completely. I said in our big preview episode a week ago that I've always wondered if J.J. McCarthy is a guy who like ends up having a really good NFL career and puts up numbers, and we all say, where was that in college? Because they just don't ask him. They just don't ask him to do a ton, you know? And so it's kind of hard to get a read on it. They didn't ask him to do a ton here, but what they did ask him to do, he did well. And that was enough to win them the game. And again, if not for a bevy of special teams mistakes, they win this game probably in regulation, if not by multiple, if not by multiple scores.
Well, here's the thing, and I think we got to talk about Jim Harbaugh for a few minutes, and then we're going to get into the national championship preview and discuss next week for a little bit. And guys, if you're here with us, this is a after midnight reaction. We are going to be talking about this game incessantly. Chris and I are both going to the national championship game. There's going to be plenty of coverage breaking down next week's game, but we wanted to dip our toes into the waters a little bit. First, though, Jim Harbaugh and what he has done the last 3 years, pretty remarkable, right? And I know there are people out there that, are saying that I don't want to talk about any of that stuff. All I want to talk about is what Michigan and Harbaugh have done. I've been watching a lot of Fargo. Have you noticed? Because I start a thought and then don't finish the sentence, but you know what I was going to say. Have you watched Fargo? Oh, geez. Oh,
I've watched. I don't watch it consistently, but yes,
it's the best show on television. You should watch it.
I'm behind.
Thoughts on Harbaugh?
I'll get to it. Yes. I bet you he's a Fargo fan, by the way.
Jim Harbaugh?
Yeah, that seems like it'd be a show.
Oh, for Pete's sake. Okay, then. Don't you know?
That was kind of Canadian there.
Are you going to actually talk about Jim Harbaugh, or are you just going to make me keep?
Oh, I was waiting for you. I thought you were.
No, I said, what do you think of Harbaugh and what he's done?
Yeah, dude, got the mug off his back. Like, he was 1-6 in bowl games coming in, lost 6 straight bowl games, was 0-2 in the semifinals. And I said, like, look, if he loses this game, we're going to talk about him like Lincoln Riley, the guy who can get you there and can't get you over the hump. And he did it. Look, like, plain and simple, they had the better team, and everything he said that they would be able to do, running the ball, winning in the trenches, they did. It's crazy to look back at that 2020 season, the last time Alabama won a championship, and that Michigan-Ohio State game gets canceled because of COVID. And Jim Harbaugh is on the verge of getting fired. If that game happens and they lose that game, it's possible he does get fired.
Listen, Chris, that Michigan team tapped out and gave up.
Yeah, it
was bad there.
He completely overhauls the staff, brings in a ton of young guys, and since then it's been 3 straight college football playoff appearances, 3 straight Ohio State wins, 3 straight Big Ten championships, and it's remarkable. And does he go to the NFL after this? I don't know. Nobody really knows with him, but he needed this in a big way, because now nobody can say, hey, they choke in the big one. They beat Alabama in the semifinal in the Rose Bowl. Like, we're like, none of that other stuff now. Like, he did it. Like, I don't want to say Michigan's playing with house money here. It'll still be a disappointment, a major disappointment, I think, if they don't win. But if Jim Harbaugh continues at Michigan, regardless of what happens in the championship game, we will talk about him differently now than we have the last 2 years.
How many coaches have coached
the previous 6 years
in a national championship game and a Super Bowl? Like, is that like, is he?
Well,
is there other ones?
Pete Carroll did. Did the BCS. He won both. Jimmy Johnson won both, but they didn't have a national championship game back then. Barry Switzer also did both, but again, not a national championship game back then. So at least 3 that I saw have won a national championship and a Super Bowl. Won both. Harbaugh didn't win a Super Bowl, but yes, to get to both is a remarkable accomplishment.
And I think that we know that Jim Harbaugh, his legacy is going to be complicated. And I don't know when that legacy at Michigan is going to end. It could be in 3 weeks or it could be in 20 years. Like, I don't know. But he is an interesting person. He has been suspended twice this year for 2 different things. And I don't know how many other coaches have done that, while also being the most beloved coach that has complete and utter support from his university president and fan base and team. And they're winning. And I guess as you win, we're not talking about the stuff that we were talking about in November. And
I will
rightfully
say, I will say,
so.
Yeah, I don't think Pete Carroll, Jimmy Johnson, or Barry Switzer sued their conference in the same year that they played for a national championship. So that is new territory for sure. But yeah, man, like that dude is Michigan to a T. He always has been. He gets it done. And I don't like, we haven't even said it. Like, I hope we're done with the Connor Stallions sign stealing stuff now. Like, yes, the investigation's going on. Yes, there will be some NCAA penalties, what have you. But I think we can now for sure officially say, like, they weren't winning games because of Connor Stallions. You know, like they just beat Alabama. Connor Stallions was not on the sideline. You know, like Michigan is legit. You can still be upset about it. You can still think they need to be penalized for it. But this notion that was around that, oh, Michigan suddenly got good because Connor Stallions joined the staff. And like, no, this is a really good team full of NFL players. And that's what they proved in this game.
Yeah. Somebody sent me a tweet during the game about Senior Bowl potential numbers here. And this is Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl. He is the director of the bowl that had NFL draft analysts breaking down players that are going to be playing in this game and how many, draft eligible prospects they have and stuff. Alabama has 9 total draft picks. Michigan has 14. Hook'em, Texas Longhorns have 11, and Washington has 10. So Michigan going into the game, despite being one of the bottom 2 in the 247 Sport composite ranking, also has the most draftable players, which is what the story that Bruce Feldman wrote at the beginning of the year, saying Michigan can do it for this reason. Now, I think there should be a distinction about what day you're picked on. And day 1, Alabama has 3 and Michigan had 1. Day 2, Alabama has 3 and Michigan has 5. Those are projections, but I think they're telling that Michigan still was able to do that. So this is an interesting thing, too, that we have to say about Alabama. I think kudos to Nick Saban for what he was able to do this year. I think that this team was inherently flawed from the beginning, and they were able to rise up and get to this point, despite the fact that it seemed almost dysfunctional earlier in the year. And this is the first 3-year period since 2006 to 2008 that Alabama has not won a national championship. So
yeah, that is crazy. Every 3-year player under Nick Saban at Alabama has won a national championship. That is nuts.
Yeah.
Now,
if you go down
until
the
until this year, this is the first 3-year class that won't have done it.
If you start having fun with like crazy Nick Saban statistics, you start going down that rabbit hole, there are a lot that make you feel like, holy crap, this guy cannot be topped. And, at a certain point that has to stop. And for the time being, it has. I don't know that I think this is the end of it. I think that we have to have more Jalen Milroe discussion. This podcast can't go on for 3 hours, but I do think that there might be a little bit of a discussion of like, is he the guy? Or did he get exposed? Like, if you think about it, my buddy Bill Landis tweeted or texted me this during the game. Used to host a podcast with him. But Landis said this, and I thought it was true. Let me find this text. Dun, dun, dun. Every single Alabama flaw was laid to bear today. Offensive line got worked. Jalen Milroe's issues about not being able just to chuck it deep all day, and Tommy Rees having issues, or that reputation, all kind of came into pass. And I think that's true. Like all the things that we talked about in terms of what Alabama was struggling with at the beginning of the year got exposed by a Michigan team that is programmed to expose your flaws. And I think this is a very good opportunity for us now to go to the next part of this.
Real quick. I just want to end on that. We'll get into this more in the offseason for sure. But there's something to be looked at here to get back to what we started this episode with, which is Alabama has had the 2 most talented rosters in the history of the 24/7 team
Mhm.
talent rankings, the recruiting rankings, the last 2 years. Neither of those teams will have played for a national championship. And both teams have been incredibly flawed, especially at the skill position. Something needs to be done about that. And remember, Ryan Grubb, the Washington offensive coordinator, turned down the Alabama offensive coordinator job in the offseason.
Mhm.
And if that had not happened, this may be a totally different national championship game. That decision is one reason why Washington will be playing for the title, and I think Alabama is not.
Well, also too, Grubb has better players.
Mhm.
They won the Joe Moore Award, the offensive line. They've got better receivers, and the quarterback's better. And I think that the running backs are washes. I mean, when you really think about it from that perspective, Washington, the number 26 overall team in the 247 Sport Composite, has better players than Alabama on offense. I hate to
Mhm.
say it, but it's true. And I think that the thing that is interesting about the Michigan-Alabama game, which I think is going to play a huge role next week, is that neither Michigan or Alabama have top-tier skill position talent, right? Is that a fair thing to say? In terms of receivers that will drive the defensive coordinator nuts. They have efficient players,
Mhm.
but they don't have game break. They don't have Romo Dunze, okay?
Right. Yes.
You're kind of giving me that look like you think I'm crazy. I just don't think that they have the game breakers. And Michigan, I guess you can say, Roman Wilson's a very good player, but Alabama, especially Isaiah Bond, played well towards the end of the year, but they didn't have that Jalen Waddle type player. And also the Michigan situation, I mean, they win their own way. Alabama is the program that signed the greatest recruiting class of wide receivers in the history of recruiting. I mean, you remember the Jalen Waddle
Mhm.
class with Henry Ruggs and Devontae Smith. Like all those guys came in the same year. So it's going to be this offense that cannot be stopped by anybody, with incredible receivers, an incredible quarterback, hopefully a healthy running back, and a great offensive line, going against a team that is experienced, plays very hard, hits you hard, executes, and wins in every moment. Who do you like coming right out of the gate here?
I don't know if I can make a pick yet, but I love that this is a clash of matchup styles. These are two very different teams, and style clashes make for very fun games. And I think Michigan is 4.5-point favorite. Is that right? I think on the opening line.
Open line here. Michigan -4.5, brought to you by BetMGM.
Yes, and so it is. I think that feels about right. I think Michigan. Look, Texas ran for more than 6 yards per carry on Washington in this game. Like Michigan's gonna run the ball with Blake Corum. I think they're gonna run the ball pretty well. I also think Michael Penix is gonna have enough time to throw deep balls and complete them. And
He
Penix
also looked
in this,
completely and utterly unbothered by a Texas pass rush the entire game.
exactly right. That's exactly what I was gonna say. Jalen Milroe, when there was pressure in his face, he crumbled. He crumbled in that game. Penix was so calm and unbothered back there, and was just shifty enough a couple of times, either to get out of the way or to break off a run, that a couple of times Texas players got to Penix and waited a second because they were waiting for him to move and do something. So yeah, Michigan's going to get pressure in this game, but is Michael Penix going to be able to make enough moves and get the plays down the field? And then the big question, I think obviously the huge question going into this game, is Dylan Johnson's health. That's Washington's number one running back. Kalen DeBoer said after the game that it was a re-aggravation of an injury suffered late in the year. So we'll see. But if Washington suddenly doesn't have its number one running back in that game, that is absolutely huge. But I think Michigan 4.5 feels about right in terms of where you're setting the line.
I think it's very easy to start going down into the realm of, I don't think that Michigan will be able to keep up with a shootout. I don't know that Michigan will be able to keep up with what Washington brings to the table offensively. And then I just realized that I'm done picking against Michigan. I think that, I firmly believe that Michigan's going to win the national championship this year. They just seem to have it all together. And I know Washington has been an underdog in every game, and, they keep proving everyone wrong. And it's a compelling storyline. But how do you pick against Michigan right now? I just don't know how you do it.
I think Michael Penix is the way you do that. Not to say that Washington's going to put up 45 points in this game, because I think Michigan will be able to run the ball again and will be able to slow that down a bit. But I just wonder, like, if Washington like gets up like 14-0 real quick for whatever reason, if Michigan comes out slow like they did in the game today, can they crawl back? Do they have an offense that can come back? Because I think Texas didn't quite have that. Texas fell behind, and they had a real tough time being able to come back. It took some lucky breaks at the end in order for them to get there. And if Washington is able to go up 2 scores quickly, or in the end of the first quarter or something, does Michigan have what it takes to come back? Will they put the game on JJ McCarthy's arm and ask him to win the game, which hasn't happened yet? So I think Washington can absolutely win this game. I mean, like, you're done doubting Michigan. I feel the same about Washington, though. I feel like we're done doubting Washington. Yeah, they've won 10 or 11 straight games by a single score, but they bullied Washington. They bullied Oregon. They bullied Texas here. I don't know. Like, it's hard to bet against both of these teams. This is why it feels like the right national championship game, by the way. Like, 2 undefeated teams. These 2 teams defined the season. Penix was the most important player in the most important games. Michigan had all the controversy around it. It was a team we talked about all year. These are the 2 biggest stories of the season meeting in the championship game. And I think that's great.
Michigan holds an 8-5 all-time series edge against Washington. They've met 4 times in the postseason, all of them in the Rose Bowl. Washington won the 1977 and 1991 games. 1991 was to share a piece of the national championship, and Michigan won in 1980 and 1992. If you're a history person, we got that from Matt Brown, who knows more about college football history.
Ubben's not on this podcast, so we didn't even talk about it, but we respect the Rose Bowl here. Both of us on this podcast.
Yes.
You've got the Rose Bowl hat on.
I wore it for a reason.
I'm a big fan of the game.
Throwing this bad boy on or what?
I've got that too. The cotton.
We just got the game that we covered. Yeah.
But yeah, no slander from Ubben here about the Rose Bowl. But yeah, Michigan, Washington. I wish this championship game was at the Rose Bowl. I know you and I are going to be driving down to Houston for it, and it'll be an easy way to get down.
We could have driven to LA. Would you have gone on a road trip with me to LA?
Oh, of course. It just feels like this game should be at the Rose Bowl, like Michigan, Washington championship.
Yeah.
But alas.
Or Indy.
Or Indy, I guess.
This is a Big Ten national championship.
My longtime belief has been that the national championship game should be at the Rose Bowl every year. Doesn't have to be January 1st, but it is the one setting in college football outside of like home stadiums that feels special. The Sugar Bowl, the Peach Bowl, the Cotton Bowl, they all feel the same. They're in these sterile NFL stadiums. The Rose Bowl feels different. And I know there's certain people who don't get it or hate it, or they're upset that they were against the playoff, that they delayed expansion of the playoff, what have you. Like, that's fine. But like, it's one of the things that is quintessential college football. And at a time when college football is kind of losing that feeling of being college football, the Rose Bowl it's college football, man. And that's what this Michigan-Alabama game was. Everything about it was everything we love about college football. And that's just why I think whatever happens in this 12-team playoff, that setting needs to continue to feel
when you're
special.
Watching the Rose Bowl, you don't think about NIL. You don't think about rule changes. You don't think about the transfer portal. You don't think about anything. You think about college football. I thought that the day was the quintessential celebration of the sport that we love. I thought the games were great. I thought they were compelling. They were interesting. They had us at the edge of our seat. I was sweating at the end of the Sugar Bowl. And you have 4 teams that theoretically could have won a national championship this year. You're down to 2 that will fight for it, and we don't know who's going to win. We have experience versus experience. I think that Michigan had like thousands more combined snaps from their starters than Alabama did coming into it, and the experience outweighed the freaks. Washington's also a very experienced team with a homegrown offensive line that we like very much. We have a really interesting offensive coordinator battle coming up next week between Sharon Moore and Grubb. Michigan's secondary is going to be much better and a much stern test, I think, than Texas's was for Michael Penix next week. But also Michael Penix, I think, should have won the Heisman. Is incredible. How healthy is Dylan Johnson going to be? And, of course, Blake Corum versus Washington's front that allowed 180 yards of rushing to Texas on Monday night. So this is going to be a hell of a game. A lot of stories. I got some columns to write from Houston about talent. If you're interested in how I feel about this, I'm going to write a column, talk to Michigan players and coaches about this, and try to quantify how they were able to do this. I really appreciate you, Chris, for joining me at 1:15 Central, and I certainly appreciate everybody here for coming by. I thought this was an incredible day.
We love college football. College football is great. As much as there's so much going on in the sport that has been frustrating, lawsuits, realignments, everything that you're kind of annoyed with, today was a great reminder of why we love this sport, why we do these jobs that we do. And here's to hoping we have a great national championship game and getting the rare trifecta. Usually we have one or two absolute duds. I think we have a real chance to have three really good games in the final 14 playoff.
Well, there were a lot of people in here. I think I saw like 650 people watching simultaneously. We really, really, really appreciate you. If you are watching this on the YouTube channel and you are not subscribed, please do so. We are going live all the time, and we will have you covered with all the college football stories, news, recruiting, everything that you need on this channel moving forward through the rest of the year. If you're listening to this in podcast form, I suggest that you also seek out the YouTube channel and subscribe to it, as there's bonus content on there. If you are not a podcast subscriber and you're listening to us on YouTube and you like listening to podcasts in the car, I urge you to go find the Until Saturday feed in the podcast feed. Wherever you guys listen to your podcasts, you'll find it. The links can be found in both shows' descriptions. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we will have Sunday Sound Off shows moving forward every Sunday into the off season. But we certainly are going to try to get this in voicemails this week because we weren't able to do so the last few weeks with all the stuff going on. If you're interested in calling and leaving a voicemail to be included onto the show, please call 316-462-9852. Again, that is 316-462-9852. Sign up for the Until Saturday newsletter where you get your daily fill of college football from The Athletic delivered right to your inbox. You do not have to be subscribed to The Athletic to get our stuff, but certainly think that when you read that newsletter, or if you are a college football fan, you would be very happy with your decision to subscribe to that, because we have a lot of really good writers and we cover the sport, I think, unlike anybody else in college football. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining me. Thank you all for being here. I'm Ari Wasserman. That's Chris Vanini. That was the latest edition of Until Saturday. We will catch you guys this week.